Panettone. It takes days to make properly. Not hours, days. The dough needs multiple slow rises across 36 to 72 hours, and that wait is exactly what separates the real thing from the versions that taste like sweetened supermarket bread. Panettone is a tall, dome-shaped Italian holiday loaf. Golden crust on the outside. Feathery, pull-apart crumb on the inside. Raisins and candied citrus scattered throughout. It comes from Milan, and the original version stays with that combination. Newer versions pack in chocolate chips, pistachio cream, or limoncello glaze, and whether those still count as panettone depends on who you ask. The crumb should feel airy but rich, light enough to pull apart in threads. A weak one is dense and faintly sweet in a way that never quite rewards you. A proper one, still warm, smells of vanilla and citrus. That difference is significant enough that people who have tasted the right version find it very hard to go back to the wrapped supermarket kind. Tamales. From the outside, they give nothing away. Just a folded corn husk, tied shut, nothing visible. What is inside is where it gets complicated. Tamales are made from masa, corn dough produced through nixtamalization, a process where dried corn is soaked in an alkaline solution. That step changes the texture and releases nutrients the grain otherwise locks away. The filling depends entirely on region and family. Pork with red chile is common across much of Mexico. Chicken with green tomatillo salsa, black beans with cheese, sweet versions with raisins and cinnamon. The whole thing is steamed until the masa firms up and peels away cleanly from the wrapper. Making tamales is not a solo task. It typically becomes a collective project. Family members lined up spreading masa, spooning filling, folding, and stacking. That communal process is as much a part of the holiday as the eating itself. They appear at Christmas, New Year's, quinceañeras, funerals. Whose grandmother's recipe is the best one is not a question with a diplomatic answer. Bûche de Noël. The whole point is that it looks exactly like a log, and the commitment to that visual is either immediately impressive or faintly suspicious. A sheet of sponge cake is baked flat, spread with buttercream or ganache, rolled tightly, then covered in chocolate frosting dragged with a fork to mimic bark. Powdered sugar becomes snow. Meringue mushrooms show up frequently. It came from France in the 19th century. Replacing the old tradition of burning a real Yule log with an edible version built in a pastry kitchen, the interior varies considerably. Some go chocolate sponge with coffee buttercream. Others use vanilla and raspberry. The most ambitious ones layer in chestnut cream or praline. A well-made one is light, creamy, genuinely satisfying. A weak one is a dense roll buried under too much frosting. France goes through enormous quantities of these every December, and people who grew up with one on the table do not think of it as theatrical. Just Christmas. Latkes. These exist because of oil. Latkes are fried potato pancakes served at Hanukkah, and the frying is not incidental. It directly references the miracle at the center of the holiday, where a small supply of oil burned for 8 days instead of 1. Grated raw potato, onion, egg, and a little flour or matzo meal. The mixture is pressed flat into hot oil. The outside crisps into a golden, lacy shell almost immediately. The inside stays soft and creamy. That contrast is the entire point. A soggy latke has already failed. They became embedded in Hanukkah tradition in Eastern Europe, where potatoes were cheap and available, then traveled with Jewish communities to the United States. Now they are widely known well outside the Jewish community. The debate that runs every year without resolution: sour cream or applesauce. Some treat it as a harmless preference. Others treat it with the seriousness of a constitutional question. Both sides have held their positions for a very long time. Lechon. Anthony Bourdain called it the best pig he had ever eaten. That sentence has followed this dish ever since. Lechon is a whole roasted pig, turned slowly over charcoal for hours. The skin becomes a deep mahogany shell. Press it and it shatters. The meat underneath is moist and deeply flavored. In the Philippines, the cavity is typically stuffed with lemongrass, garlic, and herbs before the long roast begins. It appears at Christmas Eve gatherings, fiestas, weddings, anything important enough to justify cooking an entire animal. Spain, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and several Latin American countries all have their own versions of whole roasted pig, but the Philippine version has built enough international recognition to carry its own distinct identity. The skin is the piece everyone reaches for first. Whether the meat underneath is flavorful enough to stand without the crispy exterior is what separates a great lechon from a merely acceptable one. A weak version is dry pork wrapped in skin that softened during transport. Stollen. This is not a light bread. Stollen is dense, buttery, and packed with dried fruits, nuts, candied citrus peel, and often a thick core of marzipan running straight through the center. The outside is coated in powdered sugar over a crust brushed with melted butter while still warm. It comes from Germany, specifically from Dresden, where the Dresdner Stollen has been geographically protected since 2010. The folded shape is deliberate. It is meant to represent the Christ child wrapped in cloth. Stollen has been made in Germany for close to 700 years. Early versions were far simpler, restricted during fasting periods, and gradually enriched as ingredients became available. A proper stollen improves with time. Bakers often make it weeks before Christmas and let it rest because the flavors develop and the texture softens into something more cohesive. Eaten too fresh, the citrus peel can taste sharp and slightly bitter. Rested properly, it tastes like a different thing entirely. Whether the marzipan core is the best part or an unnecessary interruption is something Germans disagree about every year. Pavlova. It goes into a hot oven, but the goal is to keep most of it soft. The outside of a pavlova forms a thin, brittle meringue shell. The inside stays marshmallowy, slow collapsing, and slightly sticky. That is not an accident. It requires high heat to set the exterior fast, then a long rest in a cooling oven so the center never fully dries out. Egg whites, sugar, cornstarch, and a small amount of vinegar. The cornstarch and vinegar protect the soft interior. The finished meringue gets loaded with whipped cream and fresh fruit, usually passion fruit, kiwi, and strawberries in Australia and New Zealand, where this is a Christmas centerpiece. Christmas falls in summer in the southern hemisphere, so a cold, fruit-covered meringue makes seasonal sense that heavy Christmas pudding simply does not. Both Australia and New Zealand claim to have invented it. Neither has agreed to stop. The dessert is named after the Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova, who toured both countries in the 1920s. What happened in that kitchen, and whose kitchen it was, depends entirely on which country is telling the story. Hallacas. Nobody makes these alone. Hallacas are a Venezuelan Christmas dish that require a room full of people to produce properly. The base is a corn dough spread onto banana leaves, then filled with a slow-cooked stew of pork, beef, and chicken, mixed with olives, raisins, capers, and sweet peppers. The leaves are folded carefully, tied with string, then boiled for an hour. The folding matters more than it seems. A careless wrap lets water in during boiling. The dough turns heavy and wet. Done correctly, the banana leaf seals the steam inside and the masa firms cleanly. The filling is deeply spiced and slightly sweet. That contrast between the soft, neutral corn exterior and the complex stew center is what makes it distinct from other wrapped corn foods. Families typically gather in the days before Christmas to make large batches together. The session can run across multiple days. Finished hallacas are shared with neighbors and sent home with relatives. Whose recipe is closest to the original is not a question that resolves easily. Shuba. The name means fur coat, and the dish is essentially wearing one. Shuba is a layered Russian salad built over pickled herring, then covered in successive layers of grated boiled potato, carrot, beets, and hard-boiled eggs, each layer spread with mayonnaise before the next one goes on. The beet layer goes last and turns the entire surface a vivid, deep magenta that gives nothing away about what is buried underneath. Sliced, the cross-section shows neat horizontal bands, beet on top, egg, carrot, potato, fish at the bottom. It appears at New Year's tables across Russia and many post-Soviet countries. The logic behind it is practical, hearty, inexpensive, and capable of feeding a large group from one bowl. The herring needs to be well salted and acidic enough to cut through the mayonnaise. Without that balance, the heaviness swallows the fish entirely and the whole dish collapses into something dense and monotone. Whether layered herring under this much mayonnaise is impressive or simply a way to bury fish is an argument that runs across every table that has ever served it. Yebeg. Weeks before Ethiopian Christmas, farmers begin feeding their lambs a high-calorie diet. The meat is being prepared specifically for this dish. Yebeg is a lamb stew built on slow-cooked onions, the spiced butter called kibbeh, and berber, a dry blend of chili, fenugreek, coriander, and several other spices. The onions are cooked down without any oil first for a long time, until they are completely soft and slightly caramelized. That step is not optional. It is what gives the stew its depth. The lamb goes in later and cooks until it falls apart in the sauce. It is served on injera, the wide, spongy sourdough flatbread that also functions as the utensil. Pieces are torn and used to scoop the stew directly. Ethiopian Christmas follows a 43-day fasting period during which many observers eat only once per day and avoid meat entirely. When the fast ends, yebeg is the dish that appears. Eating it at that moment after 43 days of waiting and eating it on any other day of the year are not the same experience. People who observe it describe the difference as something that cannot really be explained from the outside.